I have a question here that was for Tom. Oh, thanks very much. But I will ask it to all three of our presenters, panelists. But Tom, I'll get you to start things off, if that's okay. What do you think is the biggest contributor to the Bible losing its relevancy in people's everyday lives? You might want to contest the question, or you might have a go at answering it. What do you think is the biggest contributor to the Bible losing its relevancy in people's everyday lives?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I'm glad the other panelists are going to get a crack at it too, because I think I can only address part of it. I'm going to address a part of it that's very much now, because I am a journalist and I'm focused on what's happening now in our culture. And I think culture wars has a lot to do with it. You know what I mean when I say culture wars? I mean political battles, a lot of it having to do with rapid social change that we've had in this country. When I say that, in particular, I'm thinking about the rapid social acceptance of homosexuality. For millennials, by and large, and even some of us who are older, over the course of our lifetime, we've seen really an astonishing sea change in the way in which Americans generally regard same-sex relationships and same-sex couples. Now, if you're a millennium coming up in this environment, and you're around gay people, and you see them as being more or less like everybody else, as, you know, great and as horrible and as flawed and wonderful as everybody else. And then, on the other hand, there's this continued message from a certain segment of the culture based on this book that says something is really horrible about them. I think that in many cases, those people are going to choose their friends, the culture they're part of, what they've seen and observed, and it's going to make the Bible a little bit radioactive to them, as I mentioned in my opening comments. And to that I would add that we do live in a time of secularization. The philosopher Charles Taylor has this famous book, A Secular Age. What it means is that there are strong headwinds against belief in our Western culture today. And to the extent that the Bible is part of belief, it just seems hard to believe for many people. It's almost like the decks are stacked against it.
Anne? So the question is, what do you think is the biggest contributor to the Bible losing its relevancy in people's everyday lives?
Yeah, I agree a lot with what Tom said, and I think it goes to part of what I was just talking about also with there has really only been a microphone for one kind of biblical interpretation in the culture. And that's been very loud and very insistent. And it's because I came out of that myself. I grew up, I was a Baptist growing up, and then was a Pentecostal for a while, and gradually made my way around to Methodism. But in my late teens and early 20s, I was a biblical literalist. And on my college dorm room door, I had a bumper sticker that said, "God said it, and I believe it, and that settles it." And it was very difficult for people to have conversations with me, because I was very, very certain about a lot of things. And I'm still very certain about a lot of things. It's just a totally different set of things now. In some cases, diametrically opposed to the things I was very certain of at that age. But that degree of certainty, whichever side we're on, I have seen a great loss in the virtue of humility across our culture, across all. We are very certain of everything that we believe, whether it's our political beliefs or our social beliefs or our religious beliefs, and I see it on the left and the right. It is my way. It is this way. No, it's that way. And I was always reminded, when I was trying to take the Bible very literally, that was part of what brought me out of taking the Bible very literally, was looking through and hearing Paul say in 1 Corinthians 13, "Now we see through a glass darkly, In other words, it's not clear. The window that we look at is dirty. And we can see some things, but we can't see it clearly. And just a tiny little bit of humility. I found that diffusing some of those battles when you're in them with someone who totally disagrees with you can be as easy as 4 little words, as saying at the beginning of whatever you're going to say, I might be wrong. And I remember the first time I had to form those words with my lips. It was awful. It was just, I might be wrong. I never wanted to be. Darn it, I knew it. But when I could form those words, then dialogue was possible. And then when I found myself starting ministry as a woman in rural Northwest Florida, where being a woman in ministry, I had a girl in my youth group say, my mother says you're evil. Why? Well, sit down. But being able to say, I might have misunderstood my call. If you believe I might be wrong, pray for me. I am doing what I believe that God has called me to do. And having a little less certainty and a lot more humility, recognizing that we can't be certain about God. We don't know what God blesses and what God doesn't. We are not God. God is by definition, by any definition, not us, and bigger than us. And if we can totally know everything God would do and say and think in every circumstance, then we put ourselves greater than God. God is greater than us in my book. And I think a little more humility will get more ears and more dialogue so that people can begin to understand each other and learn that the Bible has some relevance.
Thank you.
You want to
have a go at that, Father Warren?
Well, after those 2 answers, I just want to take a break.
All right. So I'll give you a question.
No, I'm just messing with my colleagues. Could you repeat the question one more time?
Yep. What do you think is the biggest contributor to the Bible losing its relevancy in people's everyday lives?
I think the biggest contributor to people, or to the Bible losing its relevancy in people's lives,
everyday life, yeah.
in their everyday life, is the hypocrisy of Christians who do not live what the Bible teaches. It is that simple on one level. But if we truly understand to the depth of our being what the demands of that sacred word is, and we live by it, there might be a tendency on the part of more people wanting to investigate this beautiful, beautiful book of wisdom, God's word, that moves you and impels you to be the kind of person you are, loving and compassionate and merciful, slow to anger, non-judgmental, not condemning people, but forever and forever looking more like Jesus and acting like Jesus, living the Beatitudes and practicing the corporal and spiritual works of mercy, etc., etc. When Christians look like the gospel, more people might want to believe in that gospel.